First, I'll introduce myself. I'm Christie Burns, and I've been working with the Temperaments for about 20 years. I first became interested in the Temperaments when I studied homeopathy and studied the Temperaments through homeopathy, and then went on to herbal healing and studied the Temperaments through the traditional healing using herbs, through Chinese medicine, through Islamic medicine. And then when my children were born 15 years ago, a little bit before that, I started getting into the Temperaments and how Steiner used them in Waldorf education. And so my exposure to the Temperaments has been from so many different points of view. And it's been really interesting to note how each person who pulls forth the Temperaments gives it a different flavor. And you can learn so much by studying all these different systems. And so I really love reading anything I can. And especially, a lot of people may not realize that we're exposed to the 4 temperaments in Waldorf education, but there's all these other systems of temperaments. And so even when you go to interview for a job nowadays, sometimes you'll take a test and it tells you what type you are, you're A, L, B, whatever, and that's a temperament test. And then you have, just this whole range of things. And even Winnie the Pooh was written, each temperament was considered in that. And Shakespeare, was famous for putting the temperaments in his work, and a lot of writers put the temperaments in, and they'll either outright call the person melancholic or sanguine or whatever, and sometimes they just use those characters. And so temperaments are all over the place. They're not just something that's in Waldorf education. They're not just something that's the melancholic, sanguine, I have them all written up here. Melancholic, phlegmatic, sanguine, choleric. That's the terms that we use in the system that I'm talking about. And so that's who I am, and that's where my experience has come from. A lot of people, when I was learning about the temperaments and when I'm studying about it and talking about it and looking for information, I noticed that there's a lot of information about the temperaments. So you can read about the temperaments. This is what the phlegmatic person is like. This is what the sanguine person is like. And how many people here know what their temperament is already? Okay. And so you can read a lot about what each temperament is, but there's not a lot of talk about how these different temperaments interact. And so I've been doing consulting for many years, and people are always coming to me, during the consultation. I'll do their temperament, and then they'll say, well, what about, can you tell me what my child's temperament is or my husband's temperament is? And then how are we going to interact more efficiently and more lovingly? And just through the process of working with so many people, I realized that there was a real need for more information about this. And so I started writing the book probably 10 years ago, talking about this topic, but I didn't actually write it and put it into publication until about a month ago. And it just took me that long. I was taking notes all that time. Somebody would say something and I'd go, oh, that's interesting. And there's just the oddest things that will come up, like I would notice all of a sudden how the different temperaments would pack their suitcases differently. Or somebody this morning said something about her phlegmatic child having an affinity with cats. And it struck something in me. I said, that's really interesting. All the phlegmatics I know have an affinity with cats. And so you just, over the years, you pick up all these little details and you put them together, and that's where the interactions come in. So why, I always, I think two questions people ask me a lot is, what are the temperaments and why is it important? And I assume everybody who's coming here knows that they're important to them in some way. But the interesting thing about interacting between, I took some notes about why it's unique and why it's important from a parenting perspective. And I wanted everybody to take down these 3 things here, because this is what, when I'm teaching people about the temperaments, and everybody has their own reason why they want to learn about it, but my goal in teaching people is to teach them that what's coming at you is not personal. This is who that person is. And this is what learning about the temperaments can teach you, and it's the wisdom that it can give you. It can show you that your reactions with your interactions with the people around you, they're not all personal, and I think we tend to take a lot of things personally, and that's where a lot of conflict comes from. Learning about the temperaments can create this atmosphere between you and the other person where literally, none of the things become personal anymore. I mean, it's transformed my relationships. It's transformed so many people I've worked with, and even people who I haven't worked with who've shared an interest with temperaments with me. And that's the first thing they always say. They always say, wow, all of a sudden I'm not taking offense by this anymore. I'm not taking this personally. I'm not looking at this person's trying to torture me or this person's trying to punish me or all these other things. The second thing that I really want people to get out of this is it's all right. Everything's all right, because we sit there and we'll go, oh my gosh, this person is so slow. This person is so picky. This person is so, they're just always in my face. They talk too much. And we have all these negative labels that we'll put on some people. And there's no reason for these negative labels. Once you start looking at the temperaments, you start seeing that that is their essence. That's who they are. And these things can actually be transformed, and there's nothing wrong with the person. And especially we're talking here about the adult-child relationship. I think there's a big concern with parents, at least I know there's a concern with the parents I work with and with myself. We're always looking at the children we work with in the classroom and in our home, and we're saying, we always get this little thing going, oh, I hope there's nothing wrong with that child. You don't want to think that, and you're worried though. You want to make sure that you're not doing anything wrong, that there's nothing wrong with them. And when you start learning about the temperaments, you start realizing that there's nothing wrong with them. A lot of these, sometimes there is, and you need to deal with issues like, maybe dyslexia or different issues you may come up with in the classroom. So I'm not saying that nothing's wrong with any child, that you can't deal with a specific issue. But so many of the issues that I've come up against myself and that people come to me for, they just become non-issues once you look at the temperament situation. They're just not issues. There's nothing wrong. And then the third thing I want people to get out of this is that there are positive labels for all of these temperaments. And this is where the healing comes through, and this is where the relationships and the interactions between everybody becomes more loving, is when we can learn to see each temperament in a positive way, in a useful way, in a respectful way. And the way that I always, when I'm teaching my children about the temperaments, I always point out to them, we talk about different people, and we imagine the world like a little exercise you can do. You can imagine the world without one of the temperaments. So I always say, okay, maybe this melancholic person is bothering you with all their strictness, or their, you have to be on this, schedule, or you have to do this just right, or whatever. But imagine a world with no melancholics. None of the trains would run on time. There wouldn't be any schedule books. Nobody would be able to meet together. And then you think about the sanguines, and you go, oh my gosh, they're just all over the place, and they're doing so many things, and this and that. But then you imagine a world without the sanguine. So if you can go through this little exercise in your head, and that's a really effective exercise for me and for other people that I've done it with, is if you can imagine a world without one of these. And then it starts to come, this light starts to come on in your head, and you go, oh, each of these is very valuable, and each of these is very beautiful. And the beauty starts to come out then, because you realize that if it wasn't there, you would really miss it. So you do complain about it. Maybe you don't get along with some of the different temperaments or a certain person. But then when you start realizing what you would lose by not having that, you realize the beauty of it. And so I really want people to focus on the positive labels. And with the temperaments, you have a unique interaction between the adult and the child. And this is what I want to focus on today, is because you can talk about the temperaments, and I'll talk a little bit about the traits of each temperament, because I noticed a lot of people didn't raise their hand. They didn't know what temperament they were. So I will go through that briefly. But what I'd like to focus on today is the interaction between the adult and the child, which is very unique. And that's why I chose, when I wrote the book, I wrote adult-child relationship. Because there are a lot of adult-adult relationship books out there. And they're not maybe about the temperaments, but there's like the Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus, and there's that whole range of books like that. So there are just so many books like that. And that's a unique interaction between an adult and an adult. And you also get a unique interaction between siblings when you talk about sibling rivalry and things like that. But there's a very unique interaction when you talk about an adult and a child. And one thing is that in an adult, you become aware of your temperament. And as you come to this class, or you read about it, or even without putting a label of temperament on it, you are aware in some way of who you are and who you've become as an adult. And so the adult has an awareness of their temperament, and they know themselves either well or not very well, but they have an awareness of it. The child, though, does not have an awareness that there's this thing called temperament. When the child starts out, they just assume everybody's the same temperament they are, or they